digitalization. Let's explain the topic a little bit.
So we just released new numbers of connectivity, which shows that currently we have 5.4 billion people connected to the internet but still 2.6 billion people offline. And behind those numbers is a few also trends. First is that this double-digit growth on connectivity that we enjoyed every year during the COVID, really COVID boost we call it sometimes, is now a bit of a tapering off, so it's still growing, but not at that fast pace. And of course, another thing that's behind that is the disparities in the connectivity. So if we have in the high-income countries more than 90% of people connected, in the low-income countries less than a third is. That's where exactly those opportunities are. That's where also that divide is. And that's how. And this is important to overcome that divide to get that boost. And we see that divide with the really sometimes negative consequences. UNESCO recently released a report about education in the context of COVID-19 and remote education, and demonstrated how actually COVID, decreased those inequalities in education as well, by 500 million students being excluded from education as the world moved to online education. And of course, then, so this is like a basics what we have, but of course we're now starting to talk about this, what we call still emerging technologies, even though in many ways they emerged, like AI. So I think that's, so I think we have digitalization growing and becoming more pervasive, but we have huge disparities that we need to overcome.
Thomas talked about connectivity, so I'm going to talk about data. So imagine a scenario where, we don't have to imagine it, it happened a few weeks ago when we had those terrible floods in India. And India is one of the biggest suppliers of rice in the world. So initially, it's an environmental crisis, but it also has impacts on the global supply chain of rice. So many countries had to review how they're going to meet their needs to feed their local populations because of the floods that happened in India. Now imagine if we had the right data at the right time that would allow us to forecast these types of disasters via digital channels, being able to communicate them and put in place mitigation measures to at least lessen the effect on the global supply chain of rice. So these are the kinds of stories that data tells us, and from an environmental perspective, just to bring it back to my domain, that's also what we try to do. So we have, across the United Nations, we have 92 SDG indicators, and we're already able to track up to 42% of them using data. Of course, that leaves another 58%, and we're working on that. But it's important that we look at these data sets holistically. How does environment cross-intersect with digital? What is the digital impact, and what is the environmental impact? We always have to look at both sides of the coin.